Blog Talk Radio.
The Chemo Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit Neye Ojira Da Medinde Ojirafo Kwesi Ranem Pata Akan Akwamumain Amaruka Etibimu Ojirafo. That means greetings to all Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning African Black people. Today is Ojira Day, Purification Day. My name is Ojirafo Kwesi Ranem Pata Akan. Ojirafo be a Kwamu nation in North America. Ojiraman Mu, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I'll say we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast. Once again, we are going to open up the chat room. If you are interested in communicating via the chat room, you must log in as a user with a username in order to interact in the chat room. If you do not have a username, you can sign up for one quickly in Blog Talk. And if you are on the phone line and you have a question or a comment on the phone line, just hit the number 1 and we can see that your hand is raised, and then we can connect with you on the phone line. And we may have to reboot the chat room right quick because there's a little problem with the Blog Talk chat room. So we'll do that once again. And in the meantime, for those people who are just on the phone line, we're going to place the link that we will place in the chat room once it comes up. This is the link to the Hoodoo page on our website, ojirafo.com/Hoodoo, HOODOO.html. And we're just waiting for that to come up once again. We just rebooted. So, for the individuals who are new to the broadcast, we have 3 broadcasts on a weekly basis. We had to postpone last night's broadcast, but we typically have 3 on a weekly basis. We have Akan Bonanasom, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion, on Joda Monday nights, where we deal specifically with the Akan expression of ancestral religion, cosmology, ritual practice, culture, and so forth. We talk about ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion because there have been individuals as well as groups who have been misinforming our people consciously as well as unconsciously, depending on the individual and or group, in the Western Hemisphere, as well as on the continent, those who have been infected with white culture, pseudo-religion, and so forth. They have woven those infections into their practice and expression of Akan culture, Akan religion, and so forth on the continent, as well as in the Western Hemisphere. So we deal with authentic culture, ancient, authentic, ancestral religion, showing the continuity of culture from ancient Kanat, which is a title of Nubia, when our people migrated from ancient Kanat to the western part of the continent and re-established the Kanat, or so-called Nubian Empire, the Kanat Empire, or the Ghana Empire, a couple of thousand years ago, and then some of our people migrated from that region further south towards the forest belt and re-established Akana civilization about 1,000 years ago in the forest belt of West Afuraitkaitnit in today's Ivory Coast and Ghana. And then some of our people were forced a few hundred years later into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Kessie, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. And that's how we ended up in North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe, from our ancient civilization in Kanat to West Afuraitkaitnit to the Western Hemisphere. We also show that continuity of culture, but we show the continuity of cosmology, ritual practice, and so forth, all the way to the Western Hemisphere under the forms. Detail about that, dealing with our ancient, authentic culture, where we purge the misinformation out, pseudo-cosmology out, pseudo-ritual practices out, and deal with reality. So this is what we deal with on Akan Bonanasom. On Tuesday night, Abenada, we have Ojira, Purification, Ojira Da. We deal with ancestral religion in general and how it impacts every aspect of our lives as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, no matter what group we come from, no matter where we find ourselves on the continent or in the Western Hemisphere. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African Ancestral Religion, Nanasom, the term we use in general for ancestral religion, in essence is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject. We need to hate, repel, repulse in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions so that we may realign ourselves with divine order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance are the expansive and contracted poles of Nanasom, Afurakani, Ancestral Religion. ODWIRA, or Purification, operationalizes Nanasom. ODWIRA, or Purification, operationalizes our practice of ritually incorporating law and ritually restoring balance. And that's the essence of our ancestral religious practice, and purification promotes and operationalizes that practice. So we show how every moment of every day, every thought, every intention, every action throughout the course of our lives should be guided by the divinity that dwells within us, the Okra, as it's called in the Akan tradition, the Ka, or the Kayet in ancient Kemet, Ori Inu, as it's called in Yoruba, the Lido, as it's called in Vodun, the divinity that governs us, that was assigned to dwell within us by the Supreme Being, the Great Mother and Great Father. When we deal with spirituality and ancestral religion, which is the same thing in reality, we are aligning every thought, every intention, every action, every moment of every day with divine order as represented and manifest through the divinity that dwells within us. So, ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives when we really deal with ancestral religion. But we must purify ourselves consistently. So this is what we're talking about. And then, of course, we have Ekwa Marketplace Day on Wednesday nights, Afuada, or Wednesdays, where we showcase Afuraitkaitnit businesses, organizations, and institutions who are serving the Afuraitkaitnit, or African Black community in a positive capacity, and also those who maintain their ancestral religious values in their service to the community. So when you look on our Okom Economic Development Model page on our website, where we have published the Okom Economic Development Model, an approach to economic development rooted in our ancestral religious values, you'll see that we have a list of the businesses, organizations, and institutions, individuals, and so forth, as well as the groups who have come onto the show, talked about their business, organization, or institution with us for 2 hours. We have their websites listed. We have the link to their interviews that they did with us on the show. And you can download all of that information to support these businesses, organizations, and institutions. At the same time, we have the 4-part series we did on the Okom Economic Development Model and 2 other videos where we're dissecting that model, approach to economic development rooted in our ancestral values, which is a holistic approach. Part of that approach is to starve the beast and feed the pride. That means on a weekly basis, we make a determination about what funds we would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring, and then we starve the beast and feed the pride. That means we take those funds away from those white businesses and reallocate them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. And we are establishing and supporting one business, organization, or institution per week for 52 weeks. And we began that process in February. We're engaged in that process for optimal capital infusion. So when you starve the beast and take the $10 or $15 you would have wasted at a white business like Walmart or Burger King, McDonald's, Starbucks, or wherever, and starve the beast and feed the prize, that's a reallocation of $15 to a black business away from a white business. When 1,000 people do that in the course of a week in our community, 100 people in 10 states in America, that's 1,000 people engage in that process. That's a $15,000 infusion of capital into a black business so that they can hire within our community, remain open, expand their services to us, serve us at a greater capacity. If we do not engage that process, then we are simply by default leaving that 15,000 in the hands of our absolute enemies. Achiwadiyefo, the spirits of disorder, divinely hated the whites and their offspring, whether it's white Asians, white Europeans, white pseudo-Native Americans, white Hispanics, white Latinos, white Arabs, white Hindus, and so forth. It doesn't matter. We're leaving the money in the hands of our absolute enemies, and we are financing our own oppression when we do not engage consciously in the starving of the beast and feeding of the pride. We must engage that process on a consistent basis. So this is what we deal with on Obukuda or Akuada or Wednesday. So, announcement before we start the information for the broadcast for tonight's subject. And the chat room is open. So again, if you have questions or comments and you want to log into the chat room, you must log in with a username. And you can create one quickly in Blog Talk if you do not have a username yet. We will be in Durham, North Carolina on December 12th at 7 p.m. We will be doing a presentation based on our book, Hoodoo People, that we will be referencing tonight. The Hoodoo Akan Ancestral Religion, born of the blood circles of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Black people in North America. So we'll be dealing with that subject based on our book, the book Hoodoo People. That's North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, December 12th at the Vegan Flavor Cafe, owned by Ma'at Ma'akeru. And sister has been on our show before. You can look in the archives. She has a book published, What's in Your Womb, dealing with holistic health connected to the womb of the Afuraitkaitnit woman. But they just recently opened up their restaurant. They also are the conveners of the Het Ma'aka, the Soul Psychic Fair, which they've been doing for a few years now in different states. And at the same time, they just opened up the Vegan Flavor Cafe, and it's also a cultural center as well in reality. So not just a restaurant, a full-fledged vegan restaurant with great food, but then they also have cultural presentations and so forth that they host at the venue as well. So we will be there December 12th. You can look on the website, the Hoodoo page on our website. You will see the event flyer. You can download that flyer and share that. We'll also be posting and constantly sending out the event notification on Facebook and other places. We just came back this past weekend from Webster, New York, which is just outside of Rochester, doing that presentation on Hoodoo, the Akan Ancestral Religion in North America, born of the blood circles of our people. It was a great event in New York, and we were glad to be able to connect with the Afuraitkaitnit community there in New York. We also went to Hartford, Connecticut, did that presentation as well. It was a great event as well in Hartford, Connecticut. We were once again glad to return because we've been to Hartford, Connecticut a couple of times, and this time we did a presentation on the Hoodoo People book, and it was a great event. And of course, some people have seen some of the images that we posted from these events on the Facebook page. It was a great event. We were grateful to connect once again with the Afuraitkaitnit community in Hartford, Connecticut. And this is an ongoing piece. We'll be going to different places, sharing this information. When we go to an event, go to a different city, whether we were in Alabama earlier in the month, Montgomery, Alabama, had a great session there. Washington, D.C. on November 15th. Then we were in Atlanta on November 22nd, just outside of Atlanta. And then, of course, this past weekend, we were in Webster, New York, just outside of Rochester, and Hartford, Connecticut. And next week, we will be in Durham, North Carolina. We also have other dates coming up, so continue to check the website. Date coming up in Orlando, Florida, as well as working on presentations where people have asked us, inquired about us coming to their specific city, and that includes Iowa, as well as Louisiana, and some other places. So we'll be constantly updating the Oman, the community, on these events that are unfolding. If you would like for us to come to your region, your city, just send us an email, whether on the regular website, the ODWIRA.com website, in the contact us section, you'll see our email address there, the aquamomine@ODWIRA.com. You can also hit us up on Twitter or Facebook or, the different social media sites. Instagram, we are ODWIRA on these various sites. Kwesi Akan on Facebook, which you can also Google ODWIRA and you will find us. Send us a message. No matter what event it is, we never charge, number one, an admission fee for our people to come and listen and participate. Our events are always free to the community. We always give away one of our books, the book that we will be presenting on, to everyone who comes to the event for free. We have 17 books out now, and we'll give away one of those books to each person who comes for free. So they come to a free event, they get good information, but then they also receive a free copy of one of our books, and they can leave with that information and have something to study and share with the community. We also do not charge a speaker's fee to organizers of events, so we make those stipulations. So if you would like for us to come out, just contact us via those various social media networks. And we just put the link to the page on the website. We'll also put the link to the Oklahoma Economic Development Model page. All right. Okay. So the subject for tonight: Hoodoo Nhwehwemu, Hoodoo Analysis as a foundation for Decipherment. So, of course, we've been talking about, and we have our book, Hoodoo People, as well as the Hoodoo Mind and Homa, the Hoodoo Nation Festival Journal. So these are two separate publications, the most recent books that we have released over the past few months. And by the way, we also mentioned when we talk about the free book giveaway, we've given away over 600 copies of our softcover books to our people, the community, wherever we have gone in the various cities that we have been to. Of course, the ebook versions of our 17 books are free downloads at all times. The softcover versions we do print in-house on our own printers in color, and we do sell those. They range between $8 and $11. But we have been able to give away over 600 copies of our book to the community. So the most recent two books are Hoodoo People, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit in North America, Akan, Custodians of Hoodoo from Ancient Hoodoo Ndunu Land, Kanit, Nubia, and then the Hoodoo Mind, Homa, meaning the Hoodoo Nation Festival. We had our Hoodoo Nation Festival on October 17th here in Washington, D.C., and that's an annual festival. This was the first annual. Of course, in that publication, we talk about the etymological origin of the term hoodoo, which comes from the Akan term undu, which means medicine, specifically from roots, plants, trees, stumps, stalks, plant life, roots, medicine, and also the Nhwehwemu, Hoodoo, Mafo, Hoodoo, Sinifo, the different classes of spiritualists, healers, priests, and priestesses. These terms in our Akan tradition dealing with undu were retained in our ancestral culture here in North America. We continue to speak. We were forced into the Western Hemisphere, so we continue to say hoodoo, dealing with root medicine, root work, and so forth. And the hoodoo man, hoodoo woman, coming from the undu ma folk, the undu ma person, the giver of ritual medicine and conjuring and so forth. Hoodoo ma people became the hoodoo man and hoodoo woman people here in America, the priests and priestesses of the hoodoo tradition. And of course, the term kanche, as we have demonstrated in our article, kanche meaning ritually invoking the Abosom, the deities, and the ancestresses and ancestors. That term kanche continued to be used by our ancestresses and ancestors here in North America. The whites in our spring thought we were saying conjure when we said kanche. They thought we were just saying it with a southern dialect that was acquired once we were forced into this hemisphere, but kanche, meaning to call down the Abosom and Insamanfo, the deities and ancestral spirits through ritual incantation, is a term that's in the Akan language, but we also show in that article that the exact same terms exist in ancient Kemet. So we've been using these terms for thousands of years with the exact same meaning and function. and that includes in North America, Hoodoo and Kanja, it's Undu and Kanche. This is our ancestral heritage. So we deal with that in that book and those two books. What we're dealing with tonight is Hoodoo Nhwehwemu or Nhwehwemu, term Nhwehwemu or Nhwehwemu. When you see the spelling HW or the letter combination HW in the Akan language, it can be pronounced like Shwe or Hwe, but also sometimes with the FW, Hwe, because when you say HW together like Hwe, similar to when and where in English, but Hwe, it's very similar to the way it's pronounced if you pronounce it with an FW, Hwe, because of the way the lips are positioned and so forth. This is why, depending on the dialect, it's Hwe, Hwe, or Hwe, Hwe, HW, or FW. And that's a very important dialectical variation. We showed that in our book, Afuraitkaitnit, the origin of the term Africa, when we talked about Afurakani or Afurakani being the first place. Once the Afini people came up out of the ground at the beginning of creation, they established their capital in that place, and Afurakani is the name that was given. Of course, Afurakani, Afunika, Afrika, and so forth. We show the connection there cosmologically all the way back to ancient Kemet. But that HW sound, Hwe, and the FW, Hwe, dialectical variations. But the term Hwe means to look, to search, to seek. When you double the term Hwe, Hwe, it means to look very intently, to search, to investigate. Nhwehwemu, mu means within. So Nhwehwemu or Nhwehwemu, you being dropped in the dialect, is to look, Nhwehwemu, within. Not just to look within, like if you look in something or open up a pot or lift up the lid and look in and close it, that's just Nhwehmu. But when you have Nhwehwemu or Nhwehwemu, what you have is to look. We double that, look within, meaning you're looking intensely. You're examining, you're investigating all the way to the root. So, Nhwehwemu or Nhwehwemu means examination, investigation, analysis. So when we talk about Hoodoo Nhwehwemu, Hoodoo analysis, we apply a Hoodoo analysis to understand culture, to understand philosophy, to understand cosmology, to understand spirituality, to understand ancestral religion, to understand every aspect of our lives. What is this Hoodoo analysis? It is an analysis or an approach to investigation rooted in our ancestral religion. When you attune ritually to the Abosom, the Akan term for deity, Orisha in Yoruba, Vodou, in Fon and Eve, Ntoro and Ntoro too in ancient Kemet, but we also use the term Ntoro in Akan, meaning deity as well. Did a broadcast on that because, of course, it's the same language, the same people. When you actively engage the deity, the Abosom, the spirits that animate every aspect of creation. Just as you're a spirit that animates your physical body, a dog is a spirit that animates the physical body. Plant life is living and growing and developing because, yes, it's a physical body, but there's a spiritual fourth entity that animates the physical body of the plant. When the plant dies, that spirit separates. The same is true of mineral life, spirits that animate mineral life. So in the same fashion, when you look at the various aspects of creation, sun, moon, stars, black substance of space, oceans, rivers, earth mother, atmosphere, these are physical aspects of creation. But the spiritual entities, the spiritual agencies, the forces in nature, male and female divinities, spirit forces in nature, just as you are a spirit force that animates your physical body, you are a spirit force in nature. But as a human being, an Afurakani human being, but there are different classes of spirits, just like there are different classes of physical objects. We're all living. An animal is a living entity. A plant is a living entity. An Afurakani human being is a living entity. But there are different classifications of being. And that's true of the Abosom as well, and we did a broadcast dealing with that. The Abosom, the forces of nature, are not deified human beings. They are a separate category of being. Just like plant life is a separate category of being from a human being. So you're a spirit and you are a force in nature, but you're not a divinity, but you're connected. As an Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit person. The spirits that animate the physical aspects of creation are the deities. They regulate order in creation. The spirits that animate the earth mother, that animate the oceans, that animate the rivers, that animate the black substance of space, that animate the sun, moon, stars, planets, and so forth. These are the Abosom, the forces in nature. They are the embodiments of divine order in creation. They regulate divine order in creation. They are the organs within the body of the great divine body of the Supreme Being, Amenet and Amen, or Nhwehwemu and Nyame. So when you have that understanding of that cosmological foundation of creation, spiritual anatomy of creation, then you know the deities are the embodiments of order and they regulate order in creation. We are cells, children of the forces in nature, just like your cells are children of their organs, and the organs are children of the great body which is you. And the deities are the organs within the great divine body of the Supreme Being, and their cells are plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, human life, in the African black human life wherever we are in the world. And of course, only Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, non-black people, are not cells within the great divine body. They are cancerous, disfigured cells that are slated for destruction, elimination, extermination, eradication. So, when we can attune to the forces that govern all of creation, we attune to the order in creation, quite naturally. When your liver cells attunes with its parent organ, the liver, it's attuning with the deity that it is a component part and child of, then it's also attuning to your entire body, your entire physiological structure at the same time. It's in harmony with the order within your body. We place ourselves consciously in harmony with the order in creation because we're aligning our thoughts, intentions, and actions with the Abosom that govern us, then we're in alignment with Nhwehwemu, Nyame, Amen, Amenet, Amen, the Supreme Being. We're in alignment with divine order. Amenet, Amen, Sesher, or the divine plan, Sesher, order, arrangement, called Nhwehwemu, Nyame, Nsheshe, in the Akan. When we're in alignment with Nyame, and Sheshe, or divine order, then we can perceive the inner working of order. And we can see that in the lives of our people. We can see that in plant life, animal life, mineral life. We can see that in the productions of our people, the expressions of our people. So therefore, when we apply this Hoodoo analysis, that simply means that we investigate as we attune to divine order, so that we can see the order in things and we can see where disorder has manifested. We get a proper understanding of what's going on with our cultural expressions, ritual expressions, scholarly, quote-unquote, expressions, and so forth. So when we analyze data or we analyze situations in Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit society, analyze the movements of our enemies, the whites and their offspring and their criminality and so forth, we analyze pseudo-religion and pseudo-scholarship and various other things. Every aspect of life, we use a Hoodoo Nhwehwemu or a Hoodoo analysis. So we're able to attune to these things, and when people say, well, why is it that you're able to extract accurate information, for example, from the text of ancient Kemet, where other people have had these texts and have been pontificating about these texts, sometimes for months or years, sometimes for decades, and they have not seen the accurate information. They've been promoting misinformation, although they have the same text and things that are staring at them in plain sight, hidden in plain sight, so to speak. They can't see because their minds have been conditioned and corrupted by the white offspring, even though they may promote themselves as Afrocentric and so forth, but they still have a Eurocentric mindset wrapped in Afrocentric jargon, Eurocentrism and blackface. So then they promote misinformation on a consistent basis for years. And sometimes people can't understand how could you possibly be involved in culture and, philosophy and so forth, and such religious practices and various things for years and miss this obvious information. It's because people have blinders on, which is the vestiges of embracing some aspect of white culture and celebrating and extolling the virtues of embracing some aspect of white culture. Even though sometimes people will speak against it, but deep down inside they are still wedded to it. So, for example, we did a broadcast dealing with therapists or the rapist. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, Ancestral Religion versus psychology. And we talked about the nature of psychology or the science of the quote-unquote psyche, which is not really a science at all. We showed that, and we showed the comparisons between our people dealing with the spirit of our own people, analyzing and recognizing what's taking place within the spirit of our people with this discordant energy, discarnate ancestresses and ancestors affecting people in a negative way, and then they're diagnosed with schizophrenia or major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder and so forth. And very often they simply are receptive to ancestral spirits and non-relatives as well who are deceased, and they can't sanction and regulate these communications because they've been conditioned to believe that they are false or figments of their imagination or they are insane. And that creates pressure on the person on top of the kind of pressure they've been feeling because they can communicate with discarnate spirits, deceived spirits, and other people cannot see them or communicate with them. So some people fall into a form of depression, or some people simply communicate with those spirits and they're called schizophrenic or have multiple personality disorder, all kinds of nonsense. If you deal with ancestral religion, you knock that right out in a few minutes. If the spirit is plaguing the person, ritually they can remove those spirits and they're no longer quote-unquote depressed. That's over. A pseudo-therapist could never understand that. They are wedded to the nonsensical approach to therapeutic interventions and so forth given to them by the whites in their offspring, even if some of them call themselves Afrocentric, but they're still embracing of white culture. Their therapeutic interventions are not in reality Afrocentric. So that's just an example. When you apply a Hoodoo analysis dealing with ancestral religious values as the foundation for our analysis of data, therefore we have a holistic analysis of data. When you utilize a Hoodoo analysis, you're utilizing a holistic approach rooted in attuning to the forces that govern all of creation, that govern divine order. Then you can see the order within everything and see where disorder manifests, and then you can recognize how to eradicate that disorder so that you can bring balance back to a situation. So this is a Hoodoo analysis of various things. We have various texts that we have published, the 17 books as well as 70-plus articles and the various videos and so forth. And we have information that some people would say, well, where did you get this information from? How did you come about that? Is this information new and so forth? Some of the proper analysis and translations are new simply because people were not paying attention. People weren't using a proper analysis. So they gloss over things that they would never look at. You look at the term Afuraitkaitnit in our book, The Origin of the Term Africa, Afuraitkaitnit, the origin of the term Africa. We've been able to prove conclusively that Africa comes from the term Afuraitkaitnit. We show that in the Medusa. These are not new inscriptions that were just discovered. These inscriptions have been there all along. And people have the very book where these inscriptions are found, and they've had them in their hands for years. And they've been teaching for years that Africa does not come from ancient Kemet or the language of ancient Kemet or our ancestral languages. Some will foolishly say it comes from Scipio-Africanus, which we prove, of course, conclusively that that's not accurate. Some will try to associate it with other languages outside of the continent. Some will simply say it comes from the Berbers, the Afrika people, but they don't understand what the term means, where it comes from, and how old the term is. But of course, we proved all of that. Why weren't they able to see that? Why weren't they able to see in the Papyrus of Khunnefer, where when Ra is creating the world, and he exists upon the highland at the beginning of creation, the term Afurakai describes that process, but also describes that as a name. Why weren't they able to see that the divinity Afuraitkaitnit in the tomb of Ramessu VI, you'll see that baboon-headed divinity with the knife-shaped phallus is named Afuraitkaitnit. That construction, Afuraitkaitnit, and Afuraitkaitnit as the name of that deity is the exact same construction, Afuraitkaitnit, or Afurakai that you'll find in the papyrus of Hunefer, as well as Afurakaka, the Ka double Afurakai in the papyrus of Hunefer, Afurakaka in the papyrus of Ani, for example. That exact same construction representing Ra at the beginning of creation, forcing the primordial mound to rise up, the first landmass of Earth, and that entire process at Afurakai manifests in that papyrus. You read it there, but you also recognize that that construction is also the name of the divinity. This is where the term Afurakai or Afuraka comes from, cosmologically, and as well as phonetically. But the name of that divinity, Afuraitkaitnit, that same structure you find in the term Afurakai. Why didn't they see that divinity Afurakan? And the only difference is the Kant instead of Ka. Kant is a terraced slope. That's the Medusa for a terraced slope. A hill, a highland, but it has terraces that looks like steps. Kant. But then you have Ka, which is a slope as well, a hill or a highland, but it's a smooth slope, a straight slope or a curved straight slope. That's the only difference. So Afurakai, and then you have Afurakan. Both of them are describing that straight slope, but it's that hill, that highland from the beginning. Only difference is one is a straight slope, one is a terrace slope, but the same construction, meaning the name of a deity, and also describing a process. Why weren't they able to see the connection there? Because they are not utilizing a proper analysis. They're dealing with eurocentrism in blackness. When we talk about different fields of endeavor, we talk about psychology. And some people become certified as therapists. You know, if you become certified as a therapist, you have to go through certain processes. You have to study the DSM, Physical Manual of Disorders and so forth. You have to learn about these different, this nomenclature of psychology. You have to learn about bipolar and schizophrenia and all these different classifications that they use and specific definitions that they give, and what does it mean when someone is, under this specific rubric, or what is the Axis 1 diagnosis, all these different things. Now, some of our people are intelligent enough to recognize that this is a structure established by the whites and their offspring. They really do not know what they're talking about. They're simply labeling different behaviors based on their limited observation. They're constantly updating these things or changing these things. They give labels, they place them in a specific category, and they establish the quote-unquote standard for their manufactured field of endeavor. Psychology is not really a real field of endeavor. It's a manufactured field, manufactured by the whites and their offspring who don't have a real knowledge of the nature of the spirit, quote-unquote, psyche. So their limited perception of what it's doing and how it affects the behavior of the person, their limited perception is utilized to establish a field of study, and then they come with various branches of this field of study of psychology. Intelligent people in our community who become certified as therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, and so forth, they recognize the reality that this is a pseudo field of endeavor. However, if they would like to operate in this field so they can do therapy for our people and get paid for that and bill for that and so forth, they have to go through that process, get their certifications, get the little piece of paper so that they can legally operate in that quote-unquote field. But they know once they get in the room with the person, once they get to that therapeutic relationship, they know the nonsense that they learn from their whites and their offspring doesn't have value. They understand, if they're culturally grounded, that we're dealing with the spirit of an individual, and that can only be properly examined, Nhwehwemu, examined through the context of ancestral culture, dealing with the actual spirit. Because they have a spirit, they have ancestresses and ancestors connected to them. They have an Okra, typically, unless something has really gone wrong, they have petroclan and matriclan divinities and so forth. And some people are receptive to different aspects of this constellation of forces that govern them and guide them. Some of them are very receptive, some of them are not. So we understand these various dynamics, and we can attune to the spirit of the person, even their ancestresses and ancestors, and let them know what's going on, and let them know what ritual practices they need to engage in, to repel negative entities, to clear the way for themselves and so forth, to overcome this pseudo-depression, which is really not a depression at all. It's based on their conditioning and embracing white culture and neglecting their own craft, very often their own ancestresses and ancestors, various different things. So all of that kind of information that's really impacting our people on a consistent basis and has been for thousands of years. Some silly therapists who've been trained in, the field of psychology, they will never be able to grasp that. They'll sit around and engage in little therapeutic interventions and counseling sessions, and talking nonsense about the person's history, and believing that their little discussions are impacting the person in a positive way. They cannot tell you and they cannot quantify for you how once they're sitting on that couch and talking and going over these various issues and, establishing a little plan of action, a behavioral plan, and all this other nonsense for the client, they cannot quantify for you when, once that client leaves or even when the client is in the room, the client makes themselves receptive at some point, and then one of their ancestors or ancestresses communicates with them or urges them in a certain direction, or the Abosom that governs them urges them in a certain direction, and that's when they say, you know what, I do need to change my direction, I do need to change my life and so forth. I think I'm going to go in this direction and establish a different set of behaviors. The silly little therapist can't tell you or quantify for you when and how these ancestral spirits are assisting the person in the midst of the counseling session, and their progress has absolutely nothing to do with the little silly therapist. They can't deal with it. They will simply pat themselves on the back when the person begins to advance and improve and believe that their therapy has something to do. So that's just a snapshot of when you use a Hoodoo Nhwehwemu, Hoodoo Analysis, you can actually impact people in a positive capacity. Psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists are simply pseudo-diviners. They're trying to divine or understand, probe into the spirit, the immaterial aspect of the person, to see what's going on and try to affect a change within the person. A real diviner can attune to the spirit of the person, the crow, or the soul of the person, as well as the Nsamanfo and Abosom, the ancestral spirits and divinities who are connected to that person that they came into the world with, as well as some discarnate spirits who are non-related who may be causing the person problems, and how to deal with these issues, and how to overcome their pseudo-depression and various other things. Real diviners can do that. A pseudo-diviner, which is what a therapist is, believes that they're having some impact, but they don't even realize what ancestral and unrelated spirits are having, what kind of impact they're actually having on the person. That's just one field of endeavor. You look at medicine. It's very similar. You look at medicine and you look at the chemicals and so forth that they're constantly pumping into the environment and pumping into the foods and everything else. Some of our people study, quote-unquote, conventional medicine. They believe that they have some knowledge of something, and they're constantly promoting misinformation to our people, and our people are still sick and have horrible diets and developing all kinds of chronic diseases that can be overcome, and being placed on medication that makes them, their issue, sustains their issue, and creates other negative results in different aspects of their physical body. But when someone deals with culture from a holistic perspective, and they begin to study medicine from a traditional ancestral perspective, they can bring about and affect healing with plant life and mineral life and herbs and so forth, and in other fashion, healing with energy coming from the Abosom, the Nsamanfo, moving through the person as a vessel. When our people deal with that kind of information, they're really healing our people. They may have gone through the process of getting some certificate or some degree and so forth so that they can make a living and heal our people and have the license to have clients come in to an office or wherever they're at to engage that process, but they're not foolish enough to believe that the white approach to medicine and healing and so forth is a real holistic approach that's beneficial for our people. The brainwashed amongst our people extol the virtues of the white medical field, and they really believe in that nonsense. And sometimes they will pretend to be Afrocentric, but deep down inside they're really following white pseudo-spirituality in connection with medicine and trying to call it holistic. In reality, it's not. We're not dealing with Abosom and Nsamanfo, the deities and ancestral spirits that actually govern the person. You're dealing with medicine and catering to that. that constellation of forces that's connected to the person, then you're really not dealing with the whole life of the person. So the intelligent amongst us understand that. Those who are wedded to the white culture, they don't understand that. Again, when you use a Hoodoo analysis, something rooted in the divine order of creation, the Abosom that governs creation, the embodiments of divine order, you can see different things. You can see, if you're a physician, you can see where the illness really manifests from. If someone is feeling pressure from a discarnate spirit and they're feeling motivated to engage in certain kinds of behavior, certain kinds of activity, and they begin to eat certain foods that normally they wouldn't eat and so forth, and become, addicted to that, or they're drinking alcohol or smoking weed or whatever, and they become addicted. They go to the conventional doctor. They get misinformation. They get medication. They get pharmaceutical medication that causes them problems. And they're told they're going to have to be on this medication for the rest of their lives, maybe in their 30s or 40s, which is nonsense. They deal with somebody who's engaged in ancestral culture, and they show them how to repel these negative spirits that would otherwise lead them towards addictive behaviors and substances and so forth. How to get off of these things through ritual practice. So now you're utilizing a Hoodoo analysis. What's really taking place? What forces govern this situation? How do we assist the person to align with the forces that govern them in a harmonious capacity and a holistic, overcome these issues harmoniously and really eradicate the disorder? They're using a Hoodoo analysis. They're using an analysis rooted in the divine order of creation so they can see the whole, what's really happening. Just like the person who's a therapist, they can see what is really happening. They can probe within. They can move, look within. What's really happening? Why is the person really having these negative panic attacks and everything else? What discarnate entities are affecting the person? And how do you repel them? That's a real Hoodoo analysis that leads to positive, healthy results. Whereas people in the pseudo-conventional white culture, or the white culture dressed up as Afrocentric, but deep down inside it's really white culture, they're providing the same negative remedies for different issues, whether it's physiological through medicine, or if it's quote-unquote psychological or emotional, mental, and so forth through psychology. The same is true when people are studying culture, studying trustory, studying cosmology, studying spirituality, ancestral religion. If you look at true historical information, for example, and you apply a Hoodoo analysis, Hoodoo analysis, look within. For example, we did a series of broadcasts dealing with some of our ancestresses and ancestors here in North America. So, for example, we talk about Nana Abina Araminta, which is Harriet Tubman. She was an Akan, as a matter of fact, ancestrally, spiritually, of course, and even their descendants of Harriet Tubman have done their Nana Abina Araminta, Harriet Tubman. They've done DNA tests and found that what they said in the family tradition for generations that she was Akan, it turns out to be accurate. That DNA confirms that. But when they talk about Harriet Tubman and Akan women leading our people out of enslavement, the Underground Railroad and the whole piece, when you look at different aspects of her life that our people just gloss over, when they say she would fall into epileptic fit, they would attribute that to the injury that she sustained when the white criminal hit her in the head with a blunt object, and she had pains in her head ever since. In reality, however, when she would fall into a quote-unquote epileptic fit, and then she would come out of that epileptic fit, and then she would know which way to lead the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit off of the plantation when they're in the midst of the woods, the forest, escaping from enslavement. The whites and their offspring are sending out militias, also sending out dogs to, sniff out their scent to try to track them down and bring them back, drag them back into enslavement. She would know which way to go when she came out of these epileptic fits. They're not epileptic fits. She was being possessed. We know who she was being possessed by. She was Akan. She was being possessed by the Abosom, possessed by the Nananon Nsamampo. And once that possession was done, the Abosom had communicated with her the order of creation, communicated with her, divine law, love, and divine hate, who and what to accept, who and what to reject, what direction she needed to move to preserve all of the people that were following her out of enslavement. So when you have a Hoodoo analysis, you can look at what's really taking place with our people. You have a full perspective, a full understanding of our trustory. These are things that the whites in our offspring will never tell you or be able to share with you. These are things that the eurocentrists in blackface, those who claim to be Afrocentric but are really not, still embracing the culture of their whites in their offspring in various forms, whether it's pseudo-esotericism or some Masonic groups or some fraternity or sororal groups and so forth, thinking that's cultural, or engaged in pseudo-metaphysics or pseudo-occultism and pseudo-esotericism. All of that nonsense is what it is, nonsense. But they believe that that's the real thing. And then they cloak it in Afrocentric jargon and call it something intelligent. But they can never give you a proper perspective until they hear it from, someone else, and then they simply repeat it and pretend like they came up with it. The same is true of, we talked about Okumpo Ya, warrior Ya, Nat Turner. Did a broadcast on Okumpo Ya when he talks about he saw in the heavens signs from the Supreme Being, when he saw hieroglyphic characters in nature, and that was a sign to him, time to revolt, and it was time to revolt against the whites and their offspring. When he was guided by the Spirit to wage war against the whites and their offspring. Now we can give a proper analysis of what's taking place here. The whites and their offspring, of course, will try to say, well, he was just a Christian preacher and he really believed in the Bible and he just repeated the little prophecies and he ran with it and all this other nonsense. Okumpo Yao, warrior Yao, so-called Nat Turner, was Akan of Akan ancestry as well. He was born on a Yao Da, which is a Thursday, which is governed by the divinity Yao. The planetary body Yao governs that day. That's why it's Yao Da, Yao's day. And he was born under that divinity. The divinity Yao is, that title Yao is a title. The deity itself is Heru. And Heru has the title Yao in ancient Kemet, dealing with him as a warrior, a fighter, a combatant, and so forth. He has the title Yao in Akan. Every male born on Yao Da or Thursday is born under the governance of the divinity Yao, so they are called Yao or sometimes Kwao, denoting that relationship that they have, their crowd, their soul has with Yao, the great divinity Yao, the supreme deity Yao, as opposed to your own crowd, which is a divinity in and of itself. And of course, Yao is a child of the Supreme Being. So, grandchild of the Supreme Being. So we know who Okumpo Yao is. He's a warrior, of course. Yao means confrontational, aggressive, warlike. So people have that capacity when they have that energy complex. So Okumpo Yao, warrior Yao, waging war against the whites and their offspring to free our people from enslavement, massacring large numbers of the whites and their offspring, men, women, and children, so that we can free our people. He had that capacity to wage that kind of war because he had that energy complex and came into the world to bring that kind of power, bring that kind of fire, to work towards the end of enslavement, and he was one of the ones who brought the end of enslavement in the Western Hemisphere. We can show that connection. When he talks about seeing the spirits, he's not talking about the quote-unquote Holy Spirit, that's nonsense from the Bible. He's talking about seeing hieroglyphic characters. They're not just talking about symbols, but these are symbols from our ancestral religious practice. Adinkra, which also are included in the Medusa as quote-unquote hieroglyphic characters. Hieroglyphic is the term utilized by the whites and their offspring, but we know which symbols he was talking about because they're part of our culture as Akan people and as Afurakani and Afuraitkaitnit people in general. So we can talk about those Adinkra symbols, which are shrines in and of themselves. They are shrines for the Insamako, shrines for the Abosom. When we draw these sacred symbols, they create a field of magnetism that draws the energy of the Abosom who's associated with the symbol down to that space. So they take up a residence in that space so we can communicate with them and be impacted by them physically and spiritually. So we know about the quote-unquote hieroglyphic characters that he saw in nature. We know about the spirits in the heavens that he communicated with, who directed him to wage war against and kill the whites and their offspring. And you have a group of deities, the Kaiktiu and ancient Kemet, those who kill the enemies of Ra and Asar and other divinities, then you have a group of divine killers. And we talked about that when we talk about Marinechi, divine law, love, and divine hate. That class of Abosom or deities in Akan culture called Abosom Abrafo, or the Abrafo Abosom, the divine executioner, the divine killer, who kill those who are engaged in disorder. Just like we have the divine executioners in Akan, you have the divine executioners in nature committed all wherever black people are in the world. The forces in nature that animate the divine immune system and lymphatic system that destroys disorder within your body, but also within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. So you use a Hoodoo Nhwehwemu, Hoodoo Analysis. You can properly understand the wholeness of the issue, understand the whole picture behind the nature of people's behavior and actions, like Okumpo Yao or Warrior Yao. We did that analysis there. When we talk about Nana Kwame Afurani, George Washington Carver, people understand, of course, that he transformed agriculture all over the country and all over the world. We've talked about that on numerous occasions. But when we did that broadcast, we did it from an Akan perspective, utilizing Hoodoo Nhwehwemu, a Hoodoo analysis, a holistic analysis, a holistic approach to show who was he, the forces in nature he was connected with, how he was able to go out in nature, communicate with the plant life, and take that information back and replicate and innovate and create these products that transform the world, including the Kemeshi royal blue, so-called Egyptian royal blue, that chemists all over the world were not able to reproduce in a couple of thousand years until one of the descendants of ancient Kemet and Kanat and Kwame Afurani, so-called George Washington Carver, was able to attune to his ancestresses and ancestors and repeat that chemical feat. So this is utilizing a proper analysis, a holistic analysis, a hoodoo analysis to these various issues. When we look at these fields of endeavor, again, we talked about medicine, we talked about therapy and so forth. If you're looking at spirituality, ancestral religion, if you look at a proper analysis, because you're attuned to the forces of nature. And when you're attuned to these embodiments of divine order, you can see where misinformation shows up. When we're talking about spirituality or ancestral religion, where does corruption set in? How does corruption set in and then come to be cloaked as traditional culture? So people are trying to swindle or control or manipulate people by saying, oh, well, this has been part of the culture all along. You travel through the continent, come in contact with somebody who's in a remote village, and they say, oh, well, this is the way the culture's been all along. In reality, they've been influenced by the white and offspring over the past 100 plus years in various ways, but they'll say, this is the way the culture is, and you just need to do this. You need to give this money to these individuals so they can give you this shrine for this divinity, or else you're going to be sick and you're going to die, and you're not going to be able to make it in life and so forth. And so you utilize a Hoodoo Nhwehwemu, Hoodoo analysis, you can see where the corruptions are, because you're attuning to your own crowd, the divinity that dwells within you. You're attuning to your Petroclan and Matroclan Abosom that empower you and were assigned to empower you pre-incarnation. You communicate with your Nsamanfo, your Nananom Nsamanfo, your spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. They will direct you towards proper information and repel you from negative information in individuals or entities. So when you utilize a proper analysis, you begin to see this is when the corruption began. This is corrupt. You want to allow people to tell you, well, you don't know anything, you just got involved in the culture, so you can't speak on it. We've been doing this for 30 years. But people smoke for 30 years. People engage in crack cocaine and heroin and opium and everything else for years and years and years. So longevity means absolutely nothing. What's true and what's false, that's what means something. That's what's relevant. You have individuals who understand that process, who understand what's going on. So when you see some corruption and you apply a Hoodoo analysis, a holistic, full embodiment or embodied analysis, then you can separate out what's accurate and repel actions, so-called rituals, so-called teachings and so forth associated with ancestral religion. You can reject that, eradicate that, eliminate that, and purge the traditions of this nonsense. But you can only do that with the Hoodoo Nhwehwemu, Hoodoo analysis, and of course that's translatable into various Afurakani languages. So of course in Akan that would be a Hoodoo analysis, in Yoruba Black people in North America, that would be a Juju analysis. The phone and Ebe people would say a Vodou analysis and so forth, but we're talking about the same thing. Talking about being able to look within an issue, an event, an entity, because you have harmonized yourself with your own craft, trawa, the Abosom that are connected to you, the Nsamanfo. You're attuned to the forces that govern all of creation in a harmonious fashion, including events. And then you can analyze an event because you have that back. You have that whole perspective. Or as we say, Nkwamua, a whole life perspective. The same is true with just basic research. Some people will deal with different pseudo fields of endeavor established by the whites in our offspring, whether it's linguistics, whether it's archaeology, whether it's anthropology. These are pseudo fields of endeavor. They're not just a field of, investigative inquiry that are natural and came from the Supreme Being. They're approaches to study or examination established by the whites and their offspring based on their limited, truncated view of creation. So you're going to follow somebody with a limited view of creation and embrace their approach to investigation and then pat yourself on the back for that. That's nonsensical. It's childish. We have our own methods of Nhwehwemu or investigation that are rooted in divine order. So we're able to employ those methods and get at real information, whether it's linguistic, whether it's archaeological, whether it's so-called anthropological, whether it's biological, dealing with DNA and everything else. Our people have real methods of inquiry. Our people have real fields of endeavor that are laid out by the Abosom. The Abosom govern all aspects of creation naturally. So when they direct us towards a method of inquiry or direct us towards an analysis of something, they're giving us a blueprint on how to approach this kind of information, how to study, how to examine, how to prove, and so forth. And this is what we engage in. So this is why we're able to extract information that's linguistic from the text of ancient Kemet, ritual practices, as well as the ritual practices and language and so forth of our people here in the Western Hemisphere, and show the direct connection to West Afurakani, Central, South, and Ancient. We're able to extract that kind of information from our people engaged in various forms of culture, ancestral religious expressions, and so forth, extract the proper information, what it means, how it's relevant to us, and so forth, extract information from text, from ritual practices, from oral traditions, whatever it is, and put that information together, sometimes discovering new things that have never been published before, other times giving proper clarity and a deeper understanding of what people have engaged in, what they've talked about, what they've written about, and so forth. We can give that proper analysis because it's rooted in our orientation towards divine order, which Hoodoo is an expression of that orientation. Give me 1 second. We want to check chat room real quick. Want to make sure we didn't miss anything in the chat room. And on the phone line, if you have a question or a comment, you can hit the number 1 to raise your hand. And if you're in the chat room, again, you must log in as a user with the username in the chat room. If you don't have one in Blog Talk, you can sign up for one very quickly in Blog Talk. So we can give you another example of that. When we look at our publication, the Kufu Tuntum, the Ancestral Jurisdiction, we talk about the fictional characters of the Bible, Quran, and Talmud. Of course, none of them ever existed of any form or any race whatsoever. So when we talk about a divinity like the deity Hap-Met, the deity of the waters of the northern Nile, the term Mu means water in ancient Kemet. Mu-Hap-Met is the waters, Mu of Hap-Met, the northern Nile divinity. When we show that deity, and he's connected with Mu-Hap-Set, the deity of the southern branch of the Nile, and these two twin divinities you see in various inscriptions and so forth, talking about who they are and what their functioning creation is and so forth. People have been looking at these divinities for years. They've seen the images and so forth, but they didn't have the capacity to properly investigate and see what was staring right back at them, even in the text. They never knew that Muhammad is where Muhammad comes from and the entire cosmology. But once you apply a Hoodoo Nhwehwemu or Hoodoo analysis to these things, then you can find out what we published in the Kuku Tuntum with regard to the swelling of the river and the entire cosmology that was corrupted into this little story about Muhammad overrunning the country with Islam. We've gone over that information on a consistent basis on a number of broadcasts in the past. But that's just an example of that kind of analysis to show this is a deity in creation that's operating as a spirit that animates the river for thousands of years. We've called this divinity Muhammad. The water overruns the banks, takes over the whole country for a number of months and begins to recede. We talked about the river itself being called Sarem or Sarem, meaning a shrine or a sanctuary of the divinity, and Sarem being corrupted into Islam and so forth. So the deity himself, Muhammad, the waters of the northern Nile, he is that spirit that animates that river and has been animating that river for thousands of years and still animates that river right now, Muhammad. The river is also called Sarem. It is a sanctuary for the divinity. It is a sanctuary, Sa, of the rim, the divine teardrop from Ra. The eye of Ra, which is called the Pasit, so-called Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, was called the eye of Ra, and Offset is connected to that. She is the quote-unquote eye of Ra in this capacity. And the divine teardrop from the brightest star in the sky will quote-unquote fall every year, fall into the river and cause the river to swell and overrun its banks for a few months. And once the water recedes, the black soil has been deposited upon the banks, and then people can go out and plant and so forth. That's the agricultural cycle in ancient Kemet. So when people see that information, and then we talk about Sarem being corrupted into Salem, so the river spirit Muhammad brings Sarem, brings the river, which is a shrine, a sanctuary of Sa, of the divine teardrop, Rim, Sarem. That's Muhammad bringing Sarem, or Muhammad bringing Salem or Islam. Why couldn't our people see that when those texts have been there all along? Because they're utilizing a Eurocentric approach to analyzing data. They read the data over and over again, memorize it, but their approach is Eurocentric, so the only results they can put forward is Muhaf, is just a river divinity, and that's it. And they can't deal with anything further. We had a discussion and we posted some information on Facebook today talking about one aspect of the Kuku Tuntum, the ancestral jurisdiction. We're talking about the deity Tahuti. And we reiterated that in the post today, but it's found that you'll find the information in our book, The Kuku Tuntum, the Ancestral Jurisdiction. They've taken titles of Tahuti, the divinity of divine wisdom, titles of his, and have corrupted them into those different names applied to fictional cartoon characters who never existed. So Abraham and Moses and David and so forth, these are fictional cartoon characters who never existed in any race or in any form whatsoever. We've dealt with, of course, the Mer Impetas Stele and showed that does not say Israel at all. It says Yisrael, which is a valley in that region, in the Kanana region, so-called Canaanite region. So we dealt with that in that capacity. We dealt with Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Moses, Aaron, all of these different characters. But one of the titles of Tahuti is Afurakani. We dealt with that in the Kuku Tuntum. Afurakani is the judge of the two combatants. The judge, Rehui is the two combatants. Tahuti judges between Heru and Set. They're fighting for who's going to be the heir to Alsar and rule, as a sovereign in that seat. So Tahuti is the one who can make the two brothers come together in peace. Afurakani, he's the judge of the two combatants. Afurakani became corrupted into Ibrahim and later Abraham. Of course, the two combatants, the two quote-unquote brothers and so forth, those two combatants, Heru and Set, with the titles Shek and Smaur in ancient Kemet. We talked about Shek meaning traditional ruler, Smai meaning to join and unite, but also evil, associate, or fiend. These titles of Heru and Set, Shek and Smaur, become Ishek and Ismail. Of course, Afurakani, Shek and Smail, Ibrahim, Ishek and Ismail. This is Tahuti, Heru, and Set. Spirits that are operating through the moon, utilizing the moon as a physical transmitter of their spiritual energy, which Tahuti does. Heru operating through the core of the sun, core of the earth, and so forth. utilizing this aspect of creation to transmit his spiritual force and energy. Set, or Smaul, operating through the planet Mercury, utilizing that as the physical transmitter of his spiritual energy. So spiritual forces in creation, animating different aspects of creation, being reduced to people walking around in Palestine, a cracker walking around in Palestine with two sons, who he's going to decide between the two who's going to rule the nations of the world, and so forth. And then, of course, brainwashed black people trying to blacken up that fictional character in Palestine who never existed. So when you apply a Hoodoo analysis, a Hoodoo Nhwehwemu, you can see who these characters really are. Where did these names come from? Why is it so fragmented? When you look at the original text, you can see the entire breakdown. When you properly read the text, you can see the entire story unfold with the proper cosmological foundation. And you can see it's so fragmented in the Bible and the Quran and Talmud because they don't have the original text. Even the fragments that they have, they corrupt that. So that's just an example. Another example of Tahuti is Tahut, his name corrupted into Tahutus in Phoenician, and that Tahutus, the us at the end of Tahut, is a Greek linguistic feature. Just like you have Heru becomes Horu or Horus in Greek. Osara becomes Osiris or Osiris in Greek. Essi or Essi becomes Isis in Greek and so forth. The us becoming a Greek linguistic feature. Taut becoming Tautus in Phoenician, and Phoenician, later being, influenced by the Greeks and so forth. That Tautus is a corruption. When you drop the us, the Greek linguistic feature, you find Tahuti or Tahut is also called Taut in Kanana, or so-called Canaan. When you look in the Medusa, when you look in the way the name Tahuti or Tahut is spelled, and you see the first T sound with the Medusa hieroglyph of the open palm, the palm faced upward. That's not just a T sound or the tuh sound, but it's properly rendered as a death sound, like the D sound. So it's not in that particular rendering. You have more than one rendering. Sometimes his name is spelled with a T sound, Tahut. Sometimes it's spelled with the D sound, the symbol for the D. Dahut, Dahut, and Daut becomes, of course, corrupted into Daud in Arabic and Dawid in Hebrew and so-called David in English. When it's spelled in so-called Hebrew, Aramaic, and so forth, you'll see it spelled D-W-D, which is D-U-D or D-W-D. And they will try to approximate vocalization by saying Dawood or Dawid, but it's spelled D-W-D. Where does that come from? If you look at a title of Tahuti, of course, Tahut becoming Tahutus, but Taut, this is where it comes from. And then if you look in Coptic, you'll see the T-W-T or D-W-D, Taut, as the spelling for the name of the divinity. When you look in the text that deals with the book of the heavenly cow, and you look at what kind of powers and direction and influence, as well as responsibility, Ra, the creator, of course, Ra'ed is the creatress, but in this specific instance, Ra addressing Tahuti himself and telling Tahuti that he, and it's this book, the book of the heavenly cow, also called the destruction of mankind, Ra had destroyed through Sekhmet, sending Sekhmet out to destroy criminal men and women, but then Ra decided he was going to move up into the heavenly realm and rule from the heavenly realm, but he was going to leave Tahuti as his representative on earth. So when we quote from a specific passage of that text, dealing with that specific section, that specific episode, study that information, you will find the foundation of where they stole the Tahut or Dawud or Dawid or quote-unquote David character from in detail. Not only the name Tahut, and it's spelled T-W-T, D-W-D, exactly how it's spelled in so-called Aramaic and so-called Hebrew and so forth, but the entire cosmology that gave birth to the divinity. The forces in nature, of course, are children and grandchildren of Amen and Amenet, but there's a living cosmology. manifest through the operation of the Supreme Being in creation. So the cosmology was birthed through creation in and of itself, and we were able to attune to that cosmology because we're attuning to the forces in nature. When people actually study the cosmology, as shown in this particular text, in this section of the text, you'll see where they stole this whole story of Dawood or David from being a king and destroying the enemy and so forth, and regulating and administering a nation, and the whole notion of the house of David and all that nonsense. All of that is stolen from Tahuti. So let's read from that text real quick, and then we can show what we're talking about with regard to a Hoodoo analysis. We gave a portion of it, but we're going to read through that real quick. And if you were to Google the destruction of mankind, ancient Egypt, or the book of the heavenly cow, the book of the cow of heaven, and so forth, you'll find various translations of this text all over the net. So you can just Google that. We're going to pull this up real quick and read just a small section of that. Hold on one second. Just want to pull that up real quick. And we just want to make sure. All right. So this is what the section of the text says. This is after Ra has already sent Sechima to go and destroy the criminal men and women, and then the good men and women came forward that following morning with their bows and their weapons, and they were going to kill the enemies of Ra, and Ra blessed them for that, and so forth, talking about the killing of the enemy is higher than the sacrifice and so forth. But then Ra decides he's going to move up further into the heavenly realm and rule from there, but he's going to leave Tahuti as his vicegerent, Tahuti as his representative. Tahuti is going to sit in the seat of Ra. Now, and even before I want to read another section from that as well. So first we're going to read that small section, and then we're going to get into another section. All right. Pull up another one, another version of that so we can see it, so I can have all versions in front of me. So give me one more second, just scrolling through it real quick. All right. So after he's done that, this is what Ra said. And the majesty of this deity, meaning Ra said, called to me the god Tahuti. And one brought the deity to Ra forthwith. And the majesty of Ra said to Tahuti, let us depart to a distance from heaven, from my place, because I will make light and the spirit of light in the Duat and in the land of caves, the cavern. So Ra took the form of Ra Aku, and that's delineated later in the text where he says, I am Ra Aku, Ra, the illuminated one. So he takes the form of the illuminated, shining divinity, Ra Aku, the form of a divine light. And he asks Tahuti, come with me to the mountainous region away from the heavenly realm where the men and women who are, engaged in disorder would not be able to see where they were at. So Tahuti followed him to the mountainous region. Ra takes the form of the divine light. And then Ra says, you, Tahuti, shall write down the things which are in the Duat, the spirit realm, and you shall punish those who are in it, that is to say the workers who have worked criminality, iniquity, rebellion, and so forth. Ra says, through you, Tahuti, I will keep away from me the servants whom my heart loathes or hates or rejects. So through Tahuti, Ra will be able to keep away the enemy. You shall be in my place, Asti, and you shall therefore be called Tahuti, the Asti of Ra. The root of the term Asti is As, which means the throne or the seat, and he becomes the throne or the seat. He becomes the Asti of Ra, the one who sits in the seat of rulership on earth in place of Ra, representing Ra, the creator on earth, because Ra decided he's going to go up into the heavenly realms and rule from there from this point on. So Huti takes on this title, Asti of Ra. He's the representative of Ra. This is a divine kingship being passed on from the creator of the universe to Tahuti, who's ruling, is going to be the ruler in his place on earth. The transference of divine kingship to somebody named Tahuti or Tahut or Tawut or quote-unquote Dawood, later corrupted into David. Then he says, moreover, I give you the power to send forth. And thereupon came into being the Habwi bird, the so-called ibis bird, the crane-headed divinity. We showed that Habwi in ancient Kemet, the name of the sacred bird, Atiniwa, animal totem of Tahuti. Habwi becomes corrupted into Habwe and Kyahwe in their corrupt language. So that bird comes into being, that sacred animal totem for Tahuti. Tahuti is not the bird that's an animal totem for the bird. This is why they'll show him in that form. Somebody who's a very strong person, they will call that person a lion or a pit bull. When they're fighting somebody, the person, of course, is really not a pit bull or a lion, but they manifest those characteristics. And that animal can therefore be an animal totem representing that person. The crane itself, the Habwe bird, is the animal totem for the divinity. So Ra makes that bird come into being. Ra says, moreover, I give you the power to lift up your hand before the companies of the deities who are greater than you. And what you do shall be greater than the work of the divinity called Ken. Therefore, the divine bird, Tekani of Tahuti, came into being. But when he talks about the deities who are greater than him, it's no different than when someone, a young person, he's in line to be the king, the Ohini. He can be 18, 19, 20. And the king died. And then the king makers get together and decide who in the lineage has the character and the strength and the fortitude and the power and the focus and the mental acuity and spiritual acuity to become the next king. And out of all of the quote-unquote princes, there's one who stands out. He's elevated to sit on that seat of rulership to represent the nation. But it's a divine kingship because we have divine kingships and queenships in Afurakai, wherever we are, because we're representing that divinity, ultimately Ra and Ra'et, but also Heru and Het and Heru and so forth. So you have that divine kingship being transferred. When that young king rises up on the throne, there are still elders and eldresses in the community who are older than him, have some more experiences than him, but he has the energetic capacity to hold the nation together, and he was born to be that ruler. So he has that capacity, that responsibility. So therefore, the Nananom Mpanifo, the elders and eldresses who are spiritually cultivated, will simply recognize that and transfer their wisdom, provide their wisdom whenever the young king needs it, so he can regulate and administer the nation in a harmonious fashion, because he has the power wired within him to hold the nation together and relentlessly challenge disorder. So when they talk about Tahuti being placed on the seat of rulership, and Ra gives him the power to lift up his hand before the two companies of the divinity who are greater than him, meaning the elder and elders divinities who are greater than Tahuti, but they recognize that because Ra placed him on the throne, that Tahuti has the capacity to administer the nation in a harmonious fashion as a representative of Ra on earth. So therefore, even though they are greater than him, older, and so forth, they will support him. So this is what it's talking about. It says, moreover, I give you the power to embrace the two heavens with your beauty and with rays of light, your rays of light. Therefore shall come into being the Yah of Tahuti. The Yah of Tahuti, the term for the moon, the male divinity of the moon, is Yah. Later in Coptic, that becomes Yo and Jo. Also, Ja and Yah. Y-A-H-I-A-H, and so forth. Sometimes a U is added at the end, Yao, and so forth. So Yao and Ja, Ja, Jao, Jawi, and so forth. This is where you get Ja from, or Ya from. This is where it comes from. And Tahuti is therefore called Ya Tahuti, or Yao Tahuti. And that's been for thousands of years. Of course, you have the female divinity, Ya'at. And we did a broadcast on Ya and Ya'at, the male and female divinities of the moon. So he gives Tahuti the power to embrace the heaven with his beauty, and with his rays of light came into being the moon divinity, meaning now Tahuti utilizing the moon to transmit his spiritual power to earth, illuminating those of us who are in the dark. Then he says, moreover, I give you the power to drive back Anan, the Hadnebu, the rulers of the foreign lands and so forth. Therefore shall come into being the dog-headed ape, the Anan of Tahuti, and he shall act as a governor for me. So now, he gives Tahuti the position. He gives him an assistant, Anan. Tahuti has the title Ma'al Sher, which means true, Ma'al, of voice or word, Sher. He just went up on the mountain. Of course, you see the story, and we dealt with this in the Kuku Tuntum. This is part of that Hoodoo Analysis. Tahuti, Ma'al Sher, goes up on the mountain at the request of the deity who takes the form of a divine light. And he's told by the deity who takes the form of divine light, you are to write down what is in the spirit realm. This is a direction coming from the Creator and so forth. Then he gives him an assistant, tells him he's going to sit in the place of rulership representing the Creator on earth. He gives him an assistant called Anan. This whole story, of course, is the Ma'asher or Moshe story, the Moses story, going up on the mountain to talk to the God in the form of divine light. He's given the power of rulership. He's going to be the next ruler and so forth. He's told to write down what is in the spirit realm, meaning the quote-unquote 10 Commandments and so forth. So the whole story of the whole Moses story and this whole episode is stolen directly from this text. Also, the whole notion of the one who's going to be the ruler, the transference of divine kingship, the name of the ruler being Tahut or Dawood or Dawood, corrupted into Dawid and David and so forth, keeping back the servants that Ra loathed, keeping back those men and women who are engaged in criminality that the deity has repelled and so forth. His representative on earth who's taken his administrative seat on earth, who's the ruler on earth, who regulates and controls and delegates those fighters, divine killers, to go after those who cause problems and so forth for the divinities, all these different things from this individual named Dawood, or quote-unquote David, the great powerful king who administers the nation in a powerful fashion, follows the direction of the God and so forth. All of that is stolen directly from this text, as well as the whole Mosaic history, all of that information. So when you look in the Kuku Tuntum, the ancestral jurisdiction, we deal with that information in detail. And we do the same with Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Buddha, Brahman, Allah, Yahweh, and so forth. When you have that proper analysis rooted in the cosmology, and the cosmology is animated by the forces in nature, and the forces in nature are connected to us, just like the forces in nature physically are connected to us. We can't go too long without sunshine. We can't go too long without water or the air in the atmosphere, of course, or plant life, animal life, mineral life, and so forth, in order to nourish ourselves, rejuvenate ourselves, energize ourselves, all of these different things. Just like physically, we're dependent on the forces in nature, physically. Spiritually, our spirit bodies are fed by the forces that animate those various species of creation, and therefore we are dependent on it, a part of, just like your cell is a part of its parent organ, we are a part of that. So that's reality. When we understand that, understand our connection, we can attune to the forces in nature who govern us, and we can extract from that attunement the order governing not only creation, but the order governing specific situations and how to bring order to situations or stamp out negative situations, individuals, or entities. This is what we're doing. So those are just a couple of examples in the Kukutuntun, where we deal with that Hoodoo analysis. We talked about that in different pseudo fields of endeavor. The same thing is true for events that take place in our community, in relationship to the larger society. So we did a 7-part broadcast on ODWIRA, talking about Neverlution versus Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Revolution, Resolution. We talked about the nature of divination and warfare. We talked about Afuwat, the divinity, the lone wolf deity of war, of battle, of the hunt, of death and so forth, the lone wolf who's a divinity, and people who are children of that divinity are naturally inclined not just to be quote-unquote loners, but also to wage war and hunt, like the wolf hunt down the enemy, wage war against the enemy. And they are wired to do so, to kill the enemy. We talked about that in context of these police murders of our people, as well as white murders of our people in general. We did that broadcast. We did the broadcast dealing with Nechem, pleasure in the spirit realm, implications for warfare. If someone has been brainwashed to believe that if they engage in war against the whites in our offspring who are oppressing us, then the fictional cartoon character Jesus or the fictional Allah, some other fictional divinity will be angry, and therefore you can't wage war, you can't be full of hate and so forth. You have to show love to your enemy. In our book, Modernity, Divine Law, Love, and Divine Hate, we prove, of course, that inaction and hate is divine. There are deities, male and female, of hate. So when you have a proper analysis, you can bring that information out about divine hate, which is one half of divine order. The world comes into being through law or love, law, divine law, and love is the same concept. The world is sustained through hate, the rejection of disorder, the immune system, lymphatic system within creation. That comes from a proper analysis. So before we go forward, there's a question, it looks like, in the chat room, questions and or comments. All right. Okay, a couple of questions. Hold on one second. Okay, so one of the questions, what is a good reference to learning the glyphs? One of the books that we always recommend is a book written by Nhwehwemu. It's called Medu Nesher. Let the Ancestors Speak. I'm sorry. Let the Ancestors Speak, unveiling the mystery of Medu Nesher and so forth. But Let the Ancestors Speak. If you just Google that, Let the Ancestors Speak by Nhwehwemu, then you'll see that. Now, the book is out of print right now, but then there are people who have posted the ebook version on scribe.com, SCRIBD.com, scribe.com, and then you can find it some other places. Some people may sell it on Amazon, or they have used copies and things like that. We do know that more than one person has placed the ebook version on scribe.com, so you can download that. So we always recommend that text because it's a very good text. In connection with that, studying an ancestral language that's spoken today, it's like we utilize Akan, but you can utilize other languages as well, and you can make those comparisons, show and prove to yourself that these words that have been, defined in the language of ancient Kemet, how do you know if they're right or wrong? How do you know whether or not, this hieroglyph really does mean what the whites in our offspring said it means once they began to try to decipher and so forth? Their decipherment of the Medusa, the hieroglyphs, comes from, of course, our people showing them what these terms mean. Then they turn around and say they discovered it on their own and pat themselves on the back. And that was going on with Champollion as well as later on. But of course, in our languages, we have the same words, same deities, same place names and everything else. So you can look at the languages of contemporary Afuraitkaitnit and properly translate these texts to the proper definition. We can do that kind of analysis because when you embrace the culture, you know ancestrally where you come from, because the Insamaf will prove that to you. Then you can also lay this information out physically for people to study as well. So we always talk about the book by Nhwehwemu, but then in a connection with that, studying the language of Afuraitkai, and beginning to make those comparisons, those links, and those confirmations. That way you can also clear up misinformation that's published in many of these books dealing with our language. All right, another couple of comments, and if you have a comment on the phone line, just hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. Hold on 1 second, we saw a couple other things here. Okay. Comment said, thank you for the enlightenment. This explains how our ancient ancestors have accomplished feats that the white man still cannot explain. The white man puts knowledge in separate little boxes, and do not know that everything is connected. Exactly. And even though they may say, oh, everything is connected and we've learned how, it doesn't matter what people are saying, it's what they are doing, and that manifests their lack of connection. They don't have that connection. They can repeat that everything is connected and everything is part of a web and everything else. But when you don't have a cry, which defines them, and of course defines them outside of our community, as being separate from our community, as Afurakani people, when you don't have a cry and you don't have a ba, then you don't have the capacity to link energetically with Ryan Riot and therefore the energy of every natural occurring entity on earth. At the same time, you don't have a cry at all, so you can't align with divine order. There's no divinity of divine order dwelling within you. So quite naturally, they're going to reproduce things that are inaccurate on a regular basis. Okay, so another question about can you explain, or can you go in on the Martin Delaney and his book and the relation to the Nation of Islam and so-called Asiatic stuff? Okay, so we brought that information up. We brought it up before, but then we talked about it as well at the presentation in Connecticut this past weekend. And what we were talking about, it was coming up about Medutu hieroglyphs and so forth and decipherment and things like that. And we talked about early on, you'll find Martin Delaney, black nationalist, the precursor to, many of these Pan-African movements and so forth. Martin Delaney was at the forefront back in the 1800s. So one of the books that Martin Delaney wrote was The Origin of Races and Color. Now, he wrote that book in the so-called 1800s. He was a Pan-Africanist. He was a black nationalist. He was also a physician. He was also in the army and so forth. So one of the things he wrote was The Origin of Races and Color. And of course, back in the 1800s, that was a big deal, especially in our community. Nobody was writing about the biological basis of race. They were trying to teach our people that we were inferior because we're black. And people were still, when Martin Delaney was born, slavery was still going on. So he's writing about biology. He's talking about the epidermis and the dermal layer and everything, and talking about the colors of the skin and pigmentation. And based on the knowledge that they had at the time of what he learned in medical school at the time, this is what he was doing. At the same time, he was studying culture, studying Afuraitkaitnit culture, learning about that. He was still caught up in Christianity to a certain extent and believed in some of that nonsense, but he was also getting away from that as well, you can see in his writing. So he starts writing about ancient Kemet. Of course, he's calling it ancient Egypt. He has hieroglyphs in his book, Origin of Races and Color, and he's working to translate the hieroglyphs. This is in the 1800s. One of our people here interested in deciphering the hieroglyphs. In the Origins of Races and Color, not only is he delineating the differences between, white-skinned individuals, black people, and, Asians and so forth, then he tries to associate these three groups, the sons of Noah, the three sons of Noah. Of course, that was that Christian influence. But at the same time, he was a black nationalist, so he knew that the whites and their offspring were liars and so forth, a number of different things. But he was trying to associate these things with the Bible So when he talks about the origin of races and color, he was talking about the value of pigmentation in skin and so forth. Then he tries to say, of course, connected to the Bible, Shem, Ham, and Japheth and so forth. And Shem stayed up in Western Asia. Ham goes into Afuraitkaitnit. Ham or Akan goes into Afuraitkaitnit. And Japheth or Japheth goes into Europe. He associates these three different kind of pigmentation when he's studying the origin of races and color, melanin and pigmentation and all of that. He associates these three sons of Noah with the three quote-unquote races. But then he starts talking about how Shem was black. However, of course, Ham was black. Of course, these characters never existed, but this is what he's talking about. He'll talk about things originated in the so-called Near East, just as it says in the Bible, because he was repeating that misinformation. But then he'll say that civilization began under Ham or Ham and so forth. He associates Ham with, Ramesu, but then he associates them with deities as well. So he's like, well, they were worshiping these people as deities, and this is where worship comes from. That part was misinformation, but the key was he's studying origin of races and color, writes a book about it, talks about the differences in our skin color pigmentation, talks about how our skin color in reality is superior. Then he says the first man, of course, and the first civilization is up Adam and Eve and everything else, but he makes them black and everything else, talking about the descendants of Shem in Western Asia. But then later on, the people go to Afuraitkaitnit and begin to build civilization. So when the Nation of Islam talks about color, skin color, the difference between the whites and their offspring, talks about the black man is the original man, the Asiatic black man, and so forth, the founders of civilization. Everything they talk about, their foundational piece, comes directly from Delaney's work. That whole notion of the Asiatic black man being the maker and owner of the universe and the God of the universe, this is what distinguishes the Nation of Islam from other, quote-unquote Orthodox Muslim groups. Talking about the black man is originally from Asia and the black man is God and the founder of civilization. The white Arabs are not teaching any of that. Now, the information that the Nation of Islam teaches is fundamentally inaccurate. But where did they get some of this information from? Martin Delaney studying the origin of races and color and publishing on that. Then talking about Ham going into Africa and being worshipped as a divinity. The black man, quote unquote, is God, and also Ham and Nimrod, establishing civilization. So the African, the black establishes civilization. Martin Delaney focuses on the fact that we established civilization, even though he concedes to misinformation saying that Shem was quote unquote black, but he didn't start civilization. It was the descendants of Ham who started civilization. So this whole notion of the black man is the original man, the Asiatic black man, that's believing that Shem was the original and Adam and Eve and everything else. But then he's the maker, the owner, and the God of the universe and builder of civilization. That comes from the aspect where Delaney is talking about Ham and Nimrod and everything else, and building in Afuraitkaitnit, but then being worshipped as deities and everything else. And then, of course, talking about pigmentation, color, and everything else. So they stole that whole cosmological piece from one of the only books that would have been out at the time, written by a black person who had some knowledge of biology and cosmology and so forth. But he's deciphering hieroglyphs. He's also talking about the Yoruba tradition and the Orisha in his publication in the 1800s. That's a black nationalist returning to ancestral religion, but also and culture, and also moving forward and putting this information out, publishing this information. So we were talking about that, and then we also talked about how, the Nation of Islam corrupted the information from Delaney, took the structure, the administrative structure of the Garvey movement with the, Black Cross, the women of the Black Cross, and then the Legionnaires and so forth. And then you have, the Nation of Islam with the MGT and the FOI and, the way they stand with their feet in 45-degree angles, all that stuff. They stole the administrative structure from the Garvey movement. They removed the Christianity and replaced that with Islamic nonsense. So they're establishing these things, and then you have this, cultural and quote-unquote scientific foundation for identity coming from Martin Delaney, who was writing at, right before the surge of these little groups later on, Moorish Hebrews and Muslims and all other nonsense that pop up in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Of course, one of the few books out written by a black physician in the 1800s talking about our identity and so forth. One of the only ones, or the only one that was out, was written by Delaney. So these people get these ideas and then, move forward and corrupt them and start trying to force fake religion on us under the guise of black power. All right. And of course, again, that goes back to that Hoodoo analysis. So you're looking at Martin Delaney deciphering Medusa hieroglyphs. Then we look at Nhwehwemu, sugar refinery, but he got tired of America in the 1800s, so he migrated to France near the end of his career and so forth, and started assisting the Champollions with family with deciphering the Medusa. So from the beginning, a black man from here, two black men from here, whether it's Nhwehwemu as well as Martin Delaney, dealing with the decipherment of hieroglyphs in the 1800s, connecting that with our culture, with our ancestral culture, and being motivated by the Nsamanfo to study this information. So when our people are engaged in these kinds of studies, this is an ongoing process that's been going on for over 100 years in the black community. You have that Hoodoo analysis, you can understand what are these translations, what do they really mean, and so forth. All right. And let me see, we just want to make sure we didn't miss anything else in the chat room, so give me a second as we scroll through this information. Okay, and actually it's only a few minutes left in the broadcast. Didn't realize it was already 11:19. So, the announcement that we made earlier on in the show, we will be in North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, on December 12th at 7 p.m. We'll be doing a presentation on Hoodoo people, the Akan Ancestral Religion born of the blood circles of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit in North America, based on our book, Hoodoo People. And again, we want to say, we thank you to all those who came out to Hartford, Connecticut, as well as Westchester, New York, just outside of Rochester, over this past weekend. We had a presentation in each one of these cities, great turnout and so forth. We seek to have the same great exchange of information and give away our free books as we always do in Durham, North Carolina, coming up this weekend. So just want to make sure we didn't miss any last questions in the chat room and on the phone line before we talk about this final piece. Okay. And there was a question in the chat room about the Kabbalion. So when you're talking about, and it's interesting you mentioned that, the Kabbalion, because when we were talking about earlier, that section talking about Tahuti and the establishment of Tahuti as the ruler, established by Ra operating, utilizing the sun as a transmitter of his spiritual energy, Tahuti utilizing the moon as a transmitter of his spiritual energy. So when Tahuti asked Ra to go up to the mountain region to meet with him so that he can transfer the kingship, the divine kingship, to Tahuti, Tahuti operating through the moon, Ra operating through the sun, not being the sun, but through the sun. So when the moon and the sun unite, and then you talk about a solar eclipse, moon and the sun uniting, fusing, the light of the sun infuses the moon with this light, and then when you see the moon at nighttime, it's fully illuminate, and it can illuminate your path and so forth. It's not generating its own bright light. It's reflecting the light of the sun after Ra has called Tahuti to come up to him in the mountain region where the sun sets, the region of the mountain, the Manu region and so forth. There's an infusion of energy, transference of power and authority. Then Tahuti leaves the mountain just like the moon leaving from the mountain and moving in that direction and so forth, and then becomes the ruler in the place of Ra, the transference of divine kingship. So when we're talking about that kind of information, The whites in their offspring will take Tahuti, later corrupted into Thoth, and call him Hermes, the communicator, connected with Mercury and so forth. Even though Mercury is the communicator, the messenger, that's Awuku, but then Tahuti is a messenger as well, but he's not the same as the planet Mercury. The two different kinds of messengers. It's like in Akan culture, the Akan court is structured after divine order of creation. So you have the king or the queen mother, the Ohimi or Ohema. They have a spokesperson standing next to them with a tall staff. They are the mouthpiece of the Ohimi or Ohema. And then you have an Essane, a herald, a town crier, so to speak. So once the king speaks into the ear of the Ochiyame, the spokesperson with the tall staff, then Ochiyame speaks and says, the king has said this, this, and this is what needs to happen. So he is the mouthpiece of the king, the spokesperson of the divinity. But then you have the Essane, the messenger, who hears what has been declared by the mouthpiece, by, the Ochiyame, the spokesperson. Then he runs all throughout the kingdom, queendom, to spread that message to everybody. So there are two different kinds of messengers. For the white and offspring associated the Houthi with Hermes and call him Hermes, the thrice great and all this other nonsense. Trying to cast him as an adept who lived at some point in the past and he came back to enlighten the people. Trying to turn it into some prophetic nonsense, which that's all it really is. So, once they try to cast him as an adept and information regarding the Hermetic philosophy and the sects and so forth, they're not ancient, they're not original, they're not 100% accurate at all, not even 50% accurate. So what you find is the Greeks and other of the whites and their offspring speculating on the nature of the spirit realm, stealing information from our people, from our texts, from ancient Kemet and so forth, but also recasting, rewriting different things, misinforming our people. So you'll find a great deal of inaccuracies all throughout the work. It's not a work of our people. It is a corrupted fragment of the work of our people. So it's not just a fragment. It's bad enough if it was just a fragment, but it's a corrupted fragment. So when we deal with our own Nsamanfo, ancestresses and ancestors, the kind of information that comes from them to us are like books in and of themselves with proper analysis of life, every aspect of life, and how life impacts us in every way. So there are just a few minutes left in the broadcast. I want to make sure we didn't miss any other comments or questions. All right, so it looks like we got everybody. So, yeah, it's only a couple of minutes left in the broadcast, so we can end the broadcast here. We'll be back on tomorrow for Egua Marketplace. As we said earlier, we have the event coming up in Durham, North Carolina on December 12th. We are also tentatively going to have an event on December 19th in Washington, D.C. We're just in the process of confirming that venue, so we'll have the notifications coming up. Have also had some inquiries as well to Florida as well as Louisiana and a couple other places, so continue to look at the network, the various networks that we are on. Ojidafo on Twitter, Ojidafo on YouTube, Ojidafo on Instagram, Ojidafo, Afuraitkaitnit, as well as Akan on Facebook. Continue, and our regular website as well. Continue to check these different sources so you can find out the upcoming information for the upcoming events, planned events, and so forth. If you would like for us to come to your city, simply contact us via the regular website or on Facebook or these other social network platforms, and we can connect with you. Check out as well, before you do so, or as you're planning to connect with us, check out our Guamu Casa page. Guamu Casa page, a public speech page, and we talk about the kind of information that we present on when we come out to different regions of the country and so forth. So check out the Guamu Casa page, and we'll put that link in the chat room real quick. All right. And we talk about on that page our approach to public speech as a service to Afuraitkaitnit community. We do not charge a speaker's fee for organizers for our events, and we do not charge a fee for people to attend our events. And as we said earlier, in addition to that free event, we also give away a free copy of one of our books to all those who attend the event so they have something to leave with and study and share with our people, whether they have money or not. If you'd like to assist in those endeavors, we do sell the softcover version. All the ebook versions of our 17 books are free. Softcover versions range between $8 and $11. So if you'd like to support the effort that we have, and that we continue to engage in with regard to informing our community, accurate information, just go to the Nhwehwemu page, the publications page. You can order one or more of our books, and we have discounts for multiple orders, 20% off for the first 5 books and 30% off for 10 books or more. But, of course, our books only range between $8 and $11, so we make them as inexpensive as possible. So, again, Yedase, we thank you for tuning in to the broadcast, and Yebeshia Bio, we will meet again.
Hey, it's Flo, and this is my impression of a drill instructor directing a musical. 10 hot! Get those tap heels in line and let me see those jazz hands! Are you bundling your home and auto insurance through Progressive? Can you hear me through those sequins?
Bundle your home and auto through Progressive and save.
Left, and step ball change.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates. Home insurance provided and serviced by other select insurers.